everybody. Welcome to the Rolla Public Library live show. Before we get started, I'd like to do some announcements. Just a reminder, summer reading program will end wrong month, on August 15th. Don't forget to put in your raffle ticket prizes and to come in and get your prizes. Just bring yourself and your name and we'll look you up. Okay, I don't really have a lot of announcements today, so I'm going to pass it along for the show.
All right, thank you, Al. So glad to be here today to do one more program for Rolla Public Library. It's been a joy to do these Facebook Lives with you all. And feel free to write in the comments if you've got ideas, if you have questions all along the way. So this was intended as kind of a workshop. It's tricky to do a workshop on Facebook Live, but I'm game. So this is about telling folk tales. I tell all kinds of stories. I tell folk tales. I tell stories from books, and I tell my own stories. I tell personal stories. But I have a soft spot for folk tales, and part of that comes from being a librarian. I was a librarian. I was a children's librarian. In the 80s and early 90s, and I fell in love with the section in the library that is full of folk tales. 398.2. This is the Dewey Decimal number for folk tales and fairy tales, and I love this number. 398.2 is where you find Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark by Alvin Schwartz. It's where you find all the creepy grim tales, and it's all over the U.S. in both the children's department and the adult department of libraries. And so I just want to start out by letting you know one great place, especially when the libraries open up again, one great place to find folk tales and fairy tales. And my friend Beth Horner calls folk tales personal narratives of an entire culture. And I love that. I think that's right. I think the folk tales are the stories that people tell through the generations. And we now don't have quite as many people telling the stories that they heard their parents and grandparents and great grandparents telling them. We don't have that nearly as much as used to happen, but we've got lots of books, lots of collections of folk tales that are wonderful to tell and to read aloud as well. Beth also, I had a conversation with her the other day, and she said that folk tales are structured to be told. They're not sacred texts. So I want to talk to you a little bit about storytelling and how to tell folk tales. So remember that they're not sacred texts and that they will change. Just as language is constantly changing, folk tales are constantly changing. That is the folkloric tradition. Each storyteller makes the story their own. I'm going to get into a little bit of cultural appropriation a little bit later, but first off, let me just tell you a story. Might as well start with a story. Many of you already know the story of the gingerbread man or the gingerbread boy. This is a version of that story from the Netherlands. The pancake. There was a man who decided to make himself a pancake, and so he got out his pancake pan and he put some butter in it and he mixed up a batter and he poured that in the pan and he cooked that pancake and he cooked it and he cooked it and he saw little bubbles coming up around the edges and he knew it was time to flip the pancake. So he picked up the pan and he flipped the pancake in the pan. It landed right back down on it. And it cooked a little bit more, and it cooked a little bit more, and it cooked a little bit more. So he picked up the pan again, and he flipped it again, and it landed on the floor. And then the pancake tipped itself up on its edge, and it rolled out the door. The man said, "Come back here, I was going to eat you." But the pancake said, "No, no, no, I'm off to see the world." And it rolled and it rolled and it rolled out the door and down the road. It rolled right past a cat. And the pancake said, "Good morning." And the cat said, "Meow. Good morning. Roll over here." The pancake said, "No, no, no. I'm off to see the world." And it rolled and it rolled and it rolled and it rolled past a dog. And the dog said, "Ruff, ruff, ruff. Good morning. Roll over here." First, the pancake said, "Good morning." The dog said, "Ruff, roll over here. You look delicious." "No, no, no. I'm off to see the world." And it rolled and it rolled and it rolled past another animal. What animal do you think it rolled past? Yes, a horse. You're right. It rolled right past a horse. And the pancake said, "Good morning." And the horse said, "Good morning. Roll over here. I'm hungry." Pancake said, "No, no, no. I'm off to see the world." And it rolled and it rolled and it rolled past another animal. Do you know what it was? I see. You want me to say sheep? Of course, it was a sheep. It rolled past a sheep, and the pancake said, "Good morning." And the sheep said, "Roll over here. I'm just a little bit peckish." "No, no, no. I'm off to see the world." Rolled and it rolled and it rolled and it rolled past a pig. I know you were thinking pig. It rolled past a pig. The pancake said, "Good morning." And the pig said, I didn't hear you. Could you come a little closer?" Pancake rolled a little bit closer and said, "Good morning." I don't hear very well out of that ear. Could you roll to the other ear, please?" And the pancake rolled to the other ear and said, "Good morning." "Well, I almost heard you. Could you roll right next to my ear, please?" So the pancake rolled right next to the pig's ear and said, "Good morning." And the pig said, "Oh, good morning." And it ate half of the pancake. But the other half escaped, and it twirled down, down, down into the ground. And to this day, if you go somewhere and you see a pig, quite often you will see that pig snuffling around in the dirt, looking for something. And now you know what it's looking for: the other half of the pancake. I like to tell that one as a bit of an example because it's a useful story. It's a fun story to tell to small children. When I tell it live, I ask children what animal the pancake rolled past, and of course, I say yes to everything. So if it rolls past a great blue whale, there is a great blue whale. If there is a purple hippo, rolls past a purple hippo. All of those things, I accept those things. But it also gives a little example of how folk tales quite often are really bare bones stories. There's not a lot of fleshing out of characters, and we don't need it. Really, we don't. Folk tales often illustrate universal truths. And so we don't need to have all the details. At least the listeners don't need to have all the details. As a storyteller, I like to think about the details. I don't tell them. I like to create a whole backstory in my mind about the characters, about the setting, about the action. I like to see it all very clearly, because if I can see it, then it's less likely that the characters will be cardboard to you. Um, so um, I love that aspect of folk tales, that they are very bare bones. Often you have the prince, the princess. You might not have the princess's name. You might, but you might not. The prince's name, maybe not. What he looks like, maybe not, unless it's important in the story. If it's important in the story, please put it in. And even though he wrote this, or he said this when he was talking about personal stories, I like to quote storyteller Donald Davis. He said, I was in a workshop once years ago, and he said this thing that I loved. He said, when you're telling a story, you want it to be, you want to paint a picture, but you don't want it to be like Jackson Pollock, where you're not entirely sure what you're looking at. And you don't want it to be like Andrew Wyeth with every knot on every board, every little detail. He said, and I can't really do his North Carolina accent, but I'm going to try. He said, you want to kind of Monet it down the middle. And that's true. You want to give the impressions. And in folktales, that's really what happens quite often. And as the storyteller, you have the choice of what details you put in and what details you leave out. Let's see where I want to go on this. There are also, in telling folktales, it's a pretty broad term, folktales. Think about scary stories, campfire stories. Those are folktales. Think about urban legends. You know, Hookman, that's an urban legend. That's a folktale. Or that's that urban legend about the woman who she went to Walmart and she got in her car. It was a hot day, and she put her groceries in the back seat of the car, and she decided she would write a little note to herself. Or maybe she was checking her phone. I guess she was probably checking her phone for something. And it was a hot day. She was in the car, and all of a sudden she heard this sound. Boom! She was sure she'd been shot because she could feel her brains in the back of her head. She quick pressed the emergency thing on the phone and called 911. She said, I've been shot. I'm in the Walmart parking lot. I've been shot, and my brains are leaking out the back of my head. Oh my gosh, it was so loud. Well, they came and found her, and she hadn't been shot. No, she had one of those poppin' fresh dough containers. It was so hot that it popped when she went in the back seat of the car, and it was biscuit dough in the back of her head. That's a folktale. It is a folktale. That's an old story that I just changed that up a little bit. I added that iPhone in there, and changed it up a little bit. That's what we do when we tell stories. We make them our own. And of course, when you're telling a folk tale, you want to think about your listeners. There's the tripod, of course. I think I've talked about this before, and maybe you know it, and maybe you don't. But there's the storyteller, there's the story, there's the listener. All three of those things are important. So you want to love the story. That's pretty important, to love the story, or find some compelling reason to tell it. And you also want to love your audience, but you want to give the story that is going to be right for the audience. So I'm not going to tell the juniper tree, the story of the Brothers Grimm, the juniper tree, which is a really gruesome story of cannibalism and redemption in the end. I'm not going to tell that to 3-year-olds. I'm just not. So if I'm telling to 3-year-olds, I'm going to do finger plays, maybe rhythm, rhyme, repetition, simple stories, 5 minutes or less. And when they're done, they're done. I know this is stuff that I covered in that workshop on telling stories for parents and grandparents. I'm just going to repeat some of that. When children are 4 and 5, they start to differentiate from others and to understand other people's feelings. And I continue with repetition, rhyme, rhythm, go a little bit longer, lots of silliness, stories about families. Children are starting to think about family structure. When they're 6 and 7, they're more aware of other people's emotions, that other people have emotions. Well, that's a good thing to think about. They get an idea of morality. And they are getting very good at predicting where the story goes. When they're 8 to 10, they can figure out tricky stories. They're curious about other countries and the natural world, and they understand irony and sarcasm. They don't understand that when they're 3. Irony, sarcasm, it's not quite where their brains are. They may be less engaged by repetition, so I might cut that back. With 11 to 13-year-olds, I start with something gory, something bloody, something creepy, and I tell stories that I would tell to adults. Now, all that said, I've been doing Yes, 8 to 10-year-olds do get sarcasm, certainly, and they dish it out as well. Um, that I've been doing an every weekday story time on Zoom, and if you're interested in that, go to my website priscillahowe.com, and you can sign up for that. Um, and the children who've been coming, many of them come every single day, and I have 3-year-olds, and I have 5-year-olds, and 7-year-olds, and 10-year-olds, and because they come every day, they trust me. They know my stories. They understand that we have a relationship, and I can tell them more sophisticated stories. I decided to try that out a few weeks, about maybe a month and a half ago. I told a story, a Bulgarian story. It's a wonder tale. It's a long folk tale. And I thought, just going to try it. Just going to try this out, see if they like it. They liked it, and they requested it again and again and again. So I had created this relationship with them, and this leads me to another thing that I want to tell you about, which is my favorite book on earth is The Grammar of Fantasy, an introduction to the art of inventing stories, and it's by Gianni Rodari. I believe it's out of print now, but I want to read you just a little bit that I love um, about children listening to fairy tales. Um, for the child, the fairy tale is above all the ideal instrument for keeping the adult nearby. I'm going to skip down to the next paragraph. So this is about a mother telling or reading a fairy tale to a child. While the fairy tale flows tranquilly between the two, the child can finally enjoy the mother at his ease. Observe her face with all its particularities. Study the eyes, the mouth, the skin. He certainly listens to the tale, but he permits his attention occasionally to wander as he listens. For example, sometimes he already knows the fairy tale, and for this reason, perhaps, he has cleverly asked for the repetition of a tale he knows. And he needs only to check whether the tale follows the usual plot. In the meantime, his principal occupation can be examining his mother's face, or the face of the adult he rarely succeeds in looking at as long as he would like. I love that. That's a really interesting take on why we might tell folk tales. Um, I, I, uh, I believe firmly that storytelling, whether it's folk tales or stories from books or personal stories, storytelling is about connection. We're connecting with our audience. We're connecting with a story. The audience is connecting with the story and with a storyteller, and also the audience. If it's more than one child, they're connecting among themselves, so they have a shared history, and that's really important. Um, the telling of folk tales for generations has been about teaching teaching morality, teaching how to be in the world. Who are we as a people? Who are we, and why do we tell these stories? Um, how do we react when something bad happens in a folktale? How do the characters react? That's a way to teach children those things without actually saying it out loud. So let's see, what did I want to go to there? Oh, and I do believe in telling stories from our own cultures. I also believe in telling stories from other cultures. There's a tightrope walk here, because now I want to talk a little bit about cultural appropriation. It's very easy to sort of find a book of stories from another culture, grab one, take it, say, "Oh, this is great! I love this story," and tell it. But there's a responsibility as the teller, a responsibility if you're telling a story from a culture that is not your own, to understand that culture at least a bit, do a little bit of research, try to understand, where does that story come from? Is that a sacred story? Is that a story that people tell to young children? Is that what do I know about that culture? What markers are there of the culture within the story? Are there any? If we don't tell stories from other cultures, um, uh, we risk underrepresentation of other cultures. We risk losing the richness of other cultures, introducing children or adults to the way other people live in the world and what other people think are important. I'm going to tell you another story because this is an example of a story that Bulgarians often find really funny, and Americans say, huh? So it's just an example of sometimes a culture, a folktale can be very popular in one culture and not so much in another. Um, some of you know that Bulgaria is a kind of my hobby horse. I have lived in Bulgaria a few times, and it's a country I love. I'm not Bulgarian by blood, but I love the language. I love the culture. So this story is about a man named Joro. Joro got married, and he got married, and at the wedding, oh, they had a great time. He and his friends, everybody was there, and they ate and they drank and they drank and they drank and they drank and they drank. They did get a little bit tipsy, in fact, more than tipsy. And Joro and his buddies said, "Hey, let's go hunting. Let's go up on the mountain and go. I know where there's a bear. There's a cave where there's a bear, and let's go and get that bear." So all the men went up on the mountain to the bear's cave. Joro said, "I'll go in. It's my wedding day. I'm going in. I'm going to bring the bear out. You can hunt the bear when I go. I'll go bring it out." Joro went into the cave. He didn't come back out. He didn't come back out. The other men said, "Oh, he's not coming out. Maybe we should go and check on him." So they went in and they found him, but he didn't have a head. Yeah, his head had been taken off. So they brought him out. They said to each other, "Joro doesn't have a head. Did he have a head when he went in there?" We might have. No, I don't think so. No, I think he did. No, I think he had a. They could not decide whether he had a head when he went into that cave or not. So they went back down to the village and they went to Joro's new wife. They said, "We have a question for you. Lencho, we have a question. Did Joro have a head on his shoulders?" She said, "Did he have a head?" They said, "Yeah, we just can't remember. Did he have a head on his shoulders?" She said, "Did he have a head on his shoulders?" "Oh, yeah. I made him a hat last Christmas." So if you were an audience of Bulgarians, you would probably be laughing right now. Maybe. But if you're an audience of Americans, you might be saying, "What? Is that is that the story? Is that it?" That's it. So you want to be careful, and really, if you can, there's some great things you can do. You can do research online, of course, about the cultures where stories come from. You can also, in large cities, you may find a consulate of a of a country where the story comes from that you found that you want to tell, and you want to look up words in other languages and make sure you're pronouncing them properly. Please make sure you're pronouncing them properly. I'm going to give just a little thing right here that Americans do not often know. In Russian, there is a witch in folklore. Her name is Baba Yaga. Baba Yaga. Her name is not Baba Yaga. Her name is Baba Yaga. And so you might think about that. Am I pronouncing this the right way? Am I giving credit to the culture also? So when I'm looking for stories in books, I pay attention to the book. Is this story, oh, I said a consulate. I also meant embassies as well. So consulates and embassies. Um, so does this book give source notes? Where did this person get this story? Where did the collector get this story? Is the collector from the culture of the story? Many of the early folktale collections were collected by people from England or Western Europe, and they may have collected them in South Africa. They may have imposed a different cultural lens on that story. I am very, very skeptical of collections of stories where a story is referred to as a Native American story. And that's it, without saying what tribe. There are lots of different tribes and lots of different cultures. Same with an African story. An African story, is that a story from Morocco? Is it a story from Zimbabwe? Is it a story from Egypt? Is it a story from Nigeria? Where is it from? What is the culture? So if you can, pay attention to that. So I am working on a handout for this, and if you are interested in the handout that I do not yet have, feel free to email me. It's on. You can go to my website. There's a contact form there for the handout, which gives some of the places you can look for folk tales, and you can look. There are some sites that are really great. One is it's D.L. Ashliman. Ashliman. He has a website with folk tales that are really great with great notes. There is a website called storyarts.org. Storyarts.org. That is storyteller Heather Forrest's website, and she's got a page on there with just the nutshell, just the barest of bare bones pieces of barest of bare bones structure of many familiar folk tales, and those are great. Then you can add to those if you want to. Let's see. I do recommend, if you can, see if you can find 3 versions of the same story. See if you can find that, and that way you will find a more full way of telling that story. You'll understand the story better, and it will be fun to find different versions. I always find, what is different about this? What is different about that? Now, often people say, how do you remember these stories? Well, the good news is I don't memorize them. It's not word for word. It's image by image. So I'm watching the story in my head, and I'm watching it as if I'm watching a movie. Often with folk tales, there are phrases that are essential within the story, and I like to keep those. I like to make sure I know what those are, so that I might memorize the beginning and the end of a story, or I might memorize a refrain, something that comes up that is repeated, and make sure that it's the same every single time. So that's a little thing that's useful to know, that you don't have to memorize it. Don't worry if the story comes out differently each time. It will. Where do I want to go from here? Sanitizing folk tales. Ooh, that's a tricky one, isn't it? That's a really difficult idea about whether we clean them up to suit our culture. Well, we're sort of figuring, as we're telling stories, you do want to make sure you're taking into account the audience. If it's a truly gruesome story and you've you've cleaned it up so that there's no blood anywhere, or no nothing bad anywhere, you may have cleaned it up too much. So I don't have really firm advice on that. Um, but I will just tell you. I'll tell you another story, because this is a story that I've changed. Some storytellers say don't change the ending of a folktale. I changed the ending to this folktale, and I want to tell you why I did that, and a little bit of the um, how I kept in the danger. I want to tell you Rapunzel, an old folk tale, an old European folk tale. Of course, there's a Grimm version of it. There are other versions of this. There was a woman who was going to have a baby, and one night she said to her husband, "Husband, please go into the garden next door and get me some greens. I must have some greens from the garden next door." He said, "That's not our garden. That belongs to the old woman. It's not our garden." She said, "Please, I must have the greens. If I don't have them, I'll die." He didn't want his wife to die. And so he went into the garden next door. He tiptoed in, and he tiptoed in, and he tiptoed in. He picked some greens, and he picked some greens, and he escaped just in time. And his wife ate those greens with a lovely vinaigrette. "Oh, thank you so much, thank you." But the next night she said, "Husband, please get me more greens. I must have more greens." He said, "That is not our garden. It's stealing. I don't like this." She said, "If I don't have the greens, I will die. Please." And so he didn't want his wife to die. He went into the garden next door. He picked some greens, and he picked some greens, and he escaped just in time. And his wife ate those greens with a lovely vinaigrette. So delicious, so delicious. But the next night she said it again. "Husband, please, get me more greens. I must have the greens." He said, "I do not feel right about this." She said, if you love me, you'll get me the greens." She said, "If I don't have them, I'll die." He didn't want her to die, so he went into the garden next door. He tiptoed in, and he tiptoed in, and he tiptoed in. He picked some greens, and he picked some greens, and he picked... "You have been stealing my greens every single night." He said, "I'm so sorry. You see, my wife is going to have a baby, and if she doesn't have the greens, she'll die. And I would gladly pay you for the greens. I would be happy to pay you for the greens." "Oh, your wife is going to have a baby, and if she doesn't have the greens, she'll die. Oh, very well. You may have all the greens you want if you give me the baby when it's born." "Give you my baby? That's too much to ask." "Oh, if you don't have the greens, your wife will die. You decide." He didn't want his wife to die, so he agreed. And when the baby was born, they gave that baby to the old woman. And the couple was so heartbroken, they moved away. The old woman named that baby Rapunzel, which was also the name for the greens in the garden. And Rapunzel was a beautiful baby, and she was a beautiful little girl, and she was a beautiful young woman. But the old woman didn't want anyone looking at Rapunzel. She was too beautiful. She put Rapunzel up in a tower, and there was only one way to get into that tower, by climbing up Rapunzel's long, thick, beautiful hair. Every day the old woman came to the bottom of the tower with a basket of food over her arm, and every day she called out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your fair hair." And every day Rapunzel, whoop, threw her braid down, and the old woman climbed up with a basket of food. And they sat, and they talked, and they ate. And then the old woman would climb down that braid and go away. One day, as always, the old woman came along and called out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your fair hair." Whoom! Rapunzel threw that braid down, and the old woman climbed up it. But that day there was a prince going by, and he heard that strange song, and he saw Rapunzel's beautiful hair, and he saw her beautiful face, and he said, "Oh, I would like to meet that young woman." And so when the old woman had gone away, the prince came to the bottom of the tower, and he called out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your fair hair." Whoomp! Rapunzel threw the braid down, and the prince climbed up. And when he got to the top, she said, "Who are you? I don't know you." He said, "I'm a prince. I was going by, and I heard that strange song, and I saw your beautiful face and your beautiful hair, and I wanted to meet you. May I come in?" And she let him in. And they sat and they talked. And when he went away, he promised to come back. And he did. He came back every day after the old woman had left. Every day he came and called out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your fair hair." Whoomp! Rapunzel threw the braid down, and the prince climbed up, and the two sat and they talked, and they fell in love. One day, as always, the old woman came along, and she called out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your fair hair." Whoomp! Rapunzel threw the braid down. The old woman climbed up. She got into the tower, and Rapunzel said, "You are a little bit heavier than the prince."
The prince? There has been a prince here?
The old woman reached into her basket and pulled out a large pair of scissors. And she took Rapunzel's thick, beautiful hair and cut that braid off. And then she wrapped it around her fist and held it tight. And they waited and they waited and they waited until they heard the prince call out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your fair hair." Whoomp! The old woman threw the braid down, holding tight to that end. And the prince climbed up, expecting to see his beautiful Rapunzel. And when he got to the top, he said, "Oh no, we're caught!" And he slid down the braid. In that instant, Rapunzel jumped over the old woman, and she slid down the braid. And then Rapunzel and the prince, on the ground, took hold of that braid, and they pulled hard. They pulled it right out of the old woman's hands. So Rapunzel and the prince were on the ground, and the old woman was up in the tower. And I don't know, but it's quite possible that Rapunzel and the prince went looking for Rapunzel's real parents. And I don't know, but it's quite possible that they found them. And I don't know, but it's quite possible that they all, except the old woman, lived happily ever after. So there are a couple of changes in that story. In the original version of the Grimm Tales, Rapunzel was pregnant. And she said, "I don't know why my clothes are getting tight." And the witch, I don't call her a witch because I live in Kansas, and for many years, schools would ask me not to tell stories about witches. The kids didn't mind. The kids don't have a problem with witches, but the adults seem to, and so I call her the old woman, which now as I get older, it seems a little uncomfortable sometimes. But at any rate, I changed the ending as well. So the Grimm brothers actually changed the pregnant part in their very first volume, their first volume of first edition. She was pregnant, but in the next ones she wasn't. They sanitized that. But then the other reason is I wanted to tell a story to all ages, and the real ending of that involves throwing the prince out of the tower. He got blinded, and it was longer and more involved, and I felt that I could shorten it. But I made sure that the children wouldn't be afraid of the old woman anymore, because she didn't live happily ever after. You don't want her out in the world making life scary. The reason that schools didn't want me to tell about witches was religious objections. I still don't completely understand that, but that's if somebody is asking me to come tell stories at their school and they have that request, I'm happy to comply. So anyway, those are some changes in that. Those are reasons that I changed that. So I don't change a story willy-nilly. I don't change it just because I feel like it. I change it for a specific reason, and I try to be very thoughtful about that. We are kind of coming close to the end of what I want to say here. Let's see. There's so many things to talk about with folk tales. You can also play with them. I love playing with folk tales. Johnny Rodari suggests playing folktale salad. So take the three little pigs and the three bears, put them in the same story. See what happens if you put Goldilocks in with Little Red Riding Hood, or put Goldilocks at the top of the beanstalk. See what happens there, and play with stories with children. It's really fun to do. A game that Beth Horner taught me recently is called Interrupting Storyteller. And this is a game that's very fun to play with kids. You start by telling a familiar story. So it could be the three little pigs. And one person tells the story and the other person is the interrupter. And so it is like that joke, interrupting chicken or interrupting cow. So I'm going to start to tell this story. And I don't know, Gail, if you're the only person on here, but maybe you're not. If you would interrupt me, type something in here that will stop me telling the story. So let me give an example. Once upon a time, there were three little pigs. I did this with a kid recently, and we got to the part where the pigs were building their houses, and I said, and the first pig's house was made of, and she said, bacon. So I had to go on with that. Yes, the first pig's house was made of bacon. It was a very strange house, and it was very unsettling for the pigs to be there. And the second little pig built a house of, and she said, pork chop. Pork chops. Yes, this was even more unsettling. So what you do is you have the other person just throw something at you, and the other person has to wait at least for a sentence or two before giving us another interruption. So let me do a different story. The three bears. So Gail, feel free to throw something in here. Once upon a time, there were three bears. There was a papa bear, a mama bear, and a baby bear. They lived in a little house in the woods. And one day, Papa Bear made breakfast. He made porridge, and that porridge was a big pot of porridge. And he also made a chicken. While it was at it, he made porridge and he roasted a chicken. He stuffed that chicken with garlic and sage, and he really wanted the chicken. He didn't really want the porridge, but the chicken wasn't quite done yet. Porridge takes less time. So he spooned out the porridge and he put it in the bowls. There was a big bowl for him and a bigger bowl for, oh yes, that's right, a bigger bowl for Mama Bear and a little tiny bowl for Baby Bear. And well, he decided to eat some of the chicken, and you know what happened? You know what happened. This is what the interrupting storyteller tells me. He ate too much chicken and he farted a lot. He did. He pooted. Oh, and Mama Bear said, we have to leave this house and air it out for a little while. So they left the house because it was just too much. They left that house. They went for a walk. And so they left their porridge right on the table. Papa Bear's was very hot. Mama Bear's was pretty good, still a little cold. And Baby Bear's was just right. So anyway, that's just an example of how to play interrupting storyteller. Thank you, Gail, for playing with me. So let's see. I want to also recommend that you ask your friendly librarian for help in finding stories to tell, finding folk tales to tell. I wish I had time to go into great detail about the Storyteller's Source Book, which is a, let's see, it is a subject, title, and motif index to folklore collections for children. That is, you can look up motif, which is sort of a broad theme of the story, and you can find different stories that fit into this motif. You can find subjects. So the other day, somebody asked me about I asked somebody if she knew the story of the baker's daughter. It's about an owl, but I couldn't remember where I knew that story from. So I went and I looked up the subject. I looked up owls. Oh, there it is. Okay, and then it sent me to the book that there were a few books that story is in, so that I could then tell that friend, oh, go look at this book. You'll find that version of that, these versions in these books. So anyway, that's a whole long thing that I could go into for hours, the motif indexes, but that will be on the handout if you want the handout, if you contact me about that. Let's see. So what else did I want to say about folktales? I wanted to say, I hope you'll tell some. I hope you'll find folktales that you love. That's the big key. Find the story that you love, that you say, oh, this story. I really like this story. I'd like to tell it. Oh, and that does lead me to the thing about not memorizing. I don't know if you know this about copyright. You can't copyright an idea, but you can copyright the form of the idea. So if you find a collection of folktales in the library and you tell a story exactly as it is written in that book, then you may be violating copyright. If you're a teacher or a librarian, you're under fair use, it's fine. If you're not charging money for it, it's fine. But when you find 3 or 4 versions of the same story and then you create your own version out of that and you use your own language, you are not using that copyrighted version anymore. It has become yours. So if you tell folktales, make them your own. Find your own way of saying them. You might find ways to use gestures or songs or chants to add to the story. And let's see, Gail asks a question. Baba Yaga, is she just Russian? Well, there's Baba Yaga in Ukraine. There's Baba Yaga in a few other Slavic countries, but I think of her as mainly Russian. And burnt popcorn. Well, I don't know about that. So I wondered if you had questions about folktales, about the telling of folktales, or about anything I've said so far. If you don't have questions, maybe I'll tell you my shortest folktale. Oh, have I written a book yet? Thank you, Gail. Yes, I have written a book. It's not out yet, but I'm hoping in the fall, my book called Clever, what is it called again? Clever, Kind, Tricky, and Sly, a Bulgarian folktales sampler, will be out thanks to Parkhurst Brothers Publishing. It is a collection of Bulgarian folktales, and it has source notes, and it also has little sort of travelogue-y stuff and where I found the stories and how I found the stories and other little information about those tales. Any other questions? I'm glad to see comments on the side, and feel free to check out my website. I've got lots of information on there, PriscillaHowe.com. Also, I have a Patreon account where I am offering a subscription to bedtime stories for children. So if you're interested in that, it says there's a tab on my website called Bedtime Stories. So click on that. Gail is asking what my favorite story is to tell. I love this question. I love this question because I really only tell stories I love or somehow am drawn to. There's one story that I didn't love at first and now I do. But that means whatever story I'm telling at the moment is my favorite. It's sort of the answer that my mother gave when somebody asked her who was her favorite child. She said, the one I'm with. It's the same. Whatever story I'm with at the moment, that's the one. That's the one I love at that moment. That's my favorite at the moment. The favorite story of listeners is The Ghost with the One Black Eye. And that's on my YouTube channel. It's on my website as well, on the Listen and Watch page, but it's on my YouTube channel. And it's an old folk tale. It's a campfire story, you know, the kind of story that kids tell to each other. I learned it from my friend Mike Rundle, who's also a storyteller, and my neighbor 3 doors down. And he learned it from another storyteller, who learned it from another storyteller, who learned it from another storyteller, all the way back to whoever thought it up in the first place. So that if you decide to tell that story, please make it your own. Don't tell it exactly the way I do. And Gail, you're right. I do need some train stories because I live near the tracks, and in almost every program I do, there's a train going by at some point. I would like to thank Rolla Public Library for having me. This has been great. This is my 4th program this summer for Rolla, and I don't think I had ever performed for Rolla Public Library before, and I'm really happy about this. It's been very fun. Thank you, Allie. Thank you, Rebecca. Have a great rest of your summer. Oh, any tips for virtual storytelling? Oh, yeah, I can do that. Well, assume that there are people listening. And when I do my daily Zoom calls, I can see the kids, and I put the kids all on mute. That really, thank you, Rebecca, for having me. So yes, I put everybody on mute, but I watch. When it's Facebook Live, I can't tell, and sometimes I can't even see the comments, so I don't really know. But I try to look pretty closely into the camera. I light my face so I don't have too many shadows. I don't light behind me. I have my phone off. I often have a sign on my front door saying recording in progress, so that nobody comes and bangs on my door. It does still happen. I hope that the kittens don't play while I'm doing a story time, but I tell the kids if that happens. I don't try to be perfect. I guess that's it. Don't try to be perfect. We're all making this up. We are all doing improv in this pandemic time. So thanks for that. Yes, I do lots of participation too. And I love to do that, even in a virtual setting. It still seems to work. There we are. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you for coming. We really appreciate it. We love having you too. Just a reminder for everybody, next week we'll have Fantastic Creatures and Where They Are Found on Wednesday at 3 p.m. Be sure to watch it on Wednesday. They will only be available to watch from the beginning of the day, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., I believe is when it will be up. And then after that, it will be gone. I know they'll have a lot of cool creatures that they'll be showing. So tune in for that. And thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.